Hey, stop scrolling for a second. This story starts with a woman on her knees, scrubbing a marble floor in a mansion she'll never be allowed to sit down in. Everyone in that house looked at her and saw nothing. Maid. Replaceable. Silent. But nobody in that room knew who she used to be, what she survived, or what she was capable of the moment someone crossed the wrong line. And on one cold October night, in front of 200 of the richest people in the city, someone did. What happened next made grown men go quiet and made a bride-to-be wish she'd never opened her mouth. Hey everyone, welcome back. Before we start, tell me, where are you watching from today? Which country do you call home? Drop it in the comments. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. Today's story is one of the most emotional, most satisfying ones I've ever told on this channel. About pride, about being underestimated, and about a quiet woman who was hiding an entire life nobody could imagine. Stay with me till the end because trust me, you have not seen this twist coming. Nobody ever asks the new Maid her story. Maya Bennett had learned that a long time ago. She learned it the first week she started working for the Cross family, in a 15-bedroom estate outside Charleston, South Carolina, where the ceilings were higher than some houses and the silence felt more expensive than the furniture. She was 29 years old. Quiet. Careful. She moved through the halls like she was trying not to disturb the air itself, folding towels with corners so sharp they looked ironed, polishing silver until her own tired reflection stared back at her. The staff liked her because she never complained. The housekeeper trusted her because she never made mistakes. And nobody, not one person in that enormous house, knew that 3 years earlier Maya Bennett's name had been shouted by 12,000 people in a packed arena in Las Vegas. She used to fight under lights. Real lights, real cameras, real blood and real glory. Women's featherweight division. 14 wins, 2 losses, a title belt she'd worn for 11 months before everything in her life collapsed at once. Her mother's diagnosis, the medical bills that ate every dollar she'd ever earned, a promoter who disappeared with money that wasn't his to take. She walked away from the cage the same year she buried her mother, and she never looked back. She changed her last name in casual conversation, cut her hair, let the calluses on her knuckles soften, and became someone nobody would recognize. Maid. Invisible. If the Cross estate belonged to Daniel Cross, 33 years old, heir to a shipping and logistics empire his grandfather built from a single tugboat. Daniel wasn't like the family portraits on the wall, cold, polished, untouchable. He was warmer than that, more awkward than people expected from a man worth 9 figures. He said please and thank you to the staff. He remembered birthdays. He once spent 20 minutes helping the gardener's son with a school project about the solar system, sitting cross-legged on the lawn like it was the only thing in the world that mattered that day. Maya respected him for that. Quietly. From a distance, the way staff are trained to respect the people who sign their checks. His fiancée was a different story entirely. Vanessa Cole was 31. Beautiful in the sharp, deliberate way of someone who had spent a lifetime being told beauty was the only currency that mattered. She came from old money that had quietly become not as old money, and marrying Daniel Cross wasn't just a romance to her. It was a rescue mission for a family name that had started to fray at the edges. She smiled for cameras. She smiled for Daniel's business partners. She never smiled at the staff. You, she'd say, snapping her fingers instead of using names. You there. Girl. Never Maya. Never anyone's name if she could help it. Names made people human. And Vanessa had learned long ago that it was easier to be cruel to people you refused to see as real. The wedding was 11 days away. A 500-guest gala was being thrown that weekend to celebrate the engagement. Senators, tech billionaires, old Charleston aristocracy, all crammed onto the Cross lawn under a tent that cost more than most people's houses. Vanessa had spent 6 months planning it down to the napkin folds, And in the final week before it, her nerves had turned into something meaner. She snapped at the florist. She fired a caterer over a shade of white she decided she hated. And she'd developed a very specific, very ugly habit of taking her stress out on one person in particular. Maid had started small. A comment about a wrinkle in a tablecloth. A demand to redo an already clean chandelier. Then it grew. Vanessa began finding reasons to summon Maya into rooms just to humiliate her in front of other guests, other staff, anyone who happened to be standing nearby. She liked an audience. Cruelty to Vanessa was a performance, and she'd decided this quiet, careful woman with the calm eyes made the perfect co-star. Maya never fought back. Not with words, not with anger, not even with her face. She'd learned control in a cage in front of thousands of screaming strangers. Control was the one thing nobody could ever take from her. She absorbed it. She said, "Yes, ma'am." She kept her hands steady even when her jaw was tight enough to crack a tooth. But something in Vanessa Cole's eyes had started to sharpen lately, like she'd caught the scent of something and wanted to chase it further. Like humiliating a maid who never fought back wasn't satisfying anymore. Like she was looking for the moment Maya would finally break. She had no idea what she was actually looking for. 2 days before the gala, Daniel Cross walked into the kitchen a little after midnight and found Maya sitting alone at the staff table. Hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long gone cold, staring at nothing. He almost didn't say anything. Almost. But something about the exhaustion in her posture stopped him at the doorway. "Rough night?" he asked. Maya looked up, startled, and straightened immediately, the way staff are trained to. "I'm fine, Mr. Cross. Just finishing up." He studied her for a moment longer than was comfortable. There was something about the way she held herself. Steady, alert, like a person who was always calculating the exits in a room without meaning to. He didn't know why he noticed it. He just did. "You've got somewhere to be tomorrow off?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Family, friends?" Maya's throat tightened. "Not really," she said quietly. "It's just me." Daniel nodded slowly, like that answer meant more to him than she expected. "Well, for what it's worth," he said, turning toward the door, "you're the only person in this house who's ever actually thanked the kitchen staff for their food. I noticed that." He left before she could respond. Maya sat there a long time after he was gone, turning the cold mug in her hands, wondering, not for the first time, what would happen if the walls she'd built around her old life ever came down in a house like this. She had no idea how soon she'd find out. The gala was 2 days away, and the house had turned into a battlefield disguised as a garden party. Trucks rolled up the long gravel driveway from sunrise. Florists, lighting crews, a string quartet's worth of equipment, an ice sculptor arguing with a security guard about parking. Vanessa Cole stood in the middle of it, all in white linen and sunglasses too large for her face, barking instructions into her phone with one hand and gesturing sharply at the staff with the other. Maya spent the day on her knees. Literally. Steaming wrinkles out of 200 yards of tablecloth. Polishing brass candlesticks until her fingers ached. Carrying trays of centerpiece flowers back and forth from the greenhouse because Vanessa had changed her mind 3 times about the arrangement. She didn't complain. She never did. But something about the constant motion, the constant tension in the house, had started pulling old instincts back to the surface. Instincts she'd spent 3 years trying to bury. The part of her that used to read a room the way a fighter reads an opponent. Weight shift. Tone changes. Who was about to snap. And Vanessa was about to snap. It happened in the afternoon, in the middle of the west lawn, in front of at least 30 people setting up chairs and lighting rigs. Maya was carrying a crystal vase toward the head table. Heavy, awkward, both hands wrapped carefully around its base. When Vanessa cut across her path without warning, phone still pressed to her ear, complaining to someone about a seating chart. Maya adjusted at the last second to avoid a collision. The vase didn't break. Nothing spilled. But Vanessa, startled by the near miss, whipped around with her sunglasses sliding down her nose and her face already twisted into fury before she'd even fully turned. "Watch where you're going," she snapped, loud enough that the string quartet stopped tuning their instruments. "Do you have any idea what that vase cost? Do you have any idea what any of this cost? God, you people can't do one simple thing right." "I'm sorry, ma'am," Maya said quietly, lowering her eyes the way she'd trained herself to. "It won't happen again." Should have ended there. It always ended there. But Vanessa had an audience today. Real guests had started arriving early for a pre-gala luncheon, drifting across the lawn in linen and pearls, and something about being watched turned her cruelty up like a dial. She stepped closer, closer than necessary. Close enough that Maya could smell her expensive perfume and see the tight, glittering anger behind her sunglasses. "You know what?" Vanessa said, loud enough to carry. "I don't think you're sorry at all. I think you don't respect this house. I think you don't respect me." "That's not true, ma'am. Put the vase down." Vanessa's voice cracked like a whip across the lawn. Several guests had stopped walking now, watching with a particular fascination people reserve for other people's humiliation. "I said put it down." Maya set the vase carefully on the nearest table, her hand steady even as her heart had begun, very quietly, to pound. "Now apologize properly," Vanessa said. "On your knees." The lawn went dead silent. Even the caterers stopped moving. A groundskeeper near the hedges froze mid-motion with a pair of shears in his hand. Somewhere near the tent, a guest murmured, "Oh my God," under her breath, too shocked to look away. Maya stood very still. Something old and cold settled into her spine. Not fear, something else entirely, something that hadn't surfaced in 3 years. She thought about her mother. She thought about the hospital bills. She thought about the 11 months she'd worn a championship belt, and the years since where she'd made herself as small and quiet as possible just to survive. She did not kneel. "With respect, ma'am," Maya said, and her voice, for the first time anyone in that house had ever heard, did not shake. "I apologized. I won't be doing that." Vanessa's face went white, then red. "Excuse me. You heard me." Gasps rippled through the small crowd gathering at the edge of the lawn. A caterer near the tent actually dropped a tray of champagne flutes, glass shattering against the grass, but nobody even turned to look. Every eye was locked on the standoff unfolding in the middle of the yard. Vanessa's hand came up so fast that later, people would argue about whether she meant to actually make contact or just meant to scare her. But it didn't matter, because the moment her palm arced toward Maya's face, something happened that nobody on that lawn, in that house, in that entire family, was prepared for. Maya's hand came up and caught Vanessa's wrist midair. Not violently. Not even hard. Just fast. Inhumanly fast, controlled, precise, the kind of reflex that isn't learned in a kitchen or a laundry room. It's learned in a cage, under lights, with 12,000 people screaming and a title on the line. The lawn went so silent you could hear the wind moving through the tent canvas. Vanessa stared down at her own captured wrist, then up at Maya's face, and for the first time in her life, genuine fear flickered behind her designer sunglasses. "Don't," Maya said quietly, releasing her wrist with the same controlled calm she'd caught it. "You really don't want to do that." And from the edge of the lawn, standing frozen in the doorway of his own house, Daniel Cross had seen the entire thing. Daniel didn't move for 3 full seconds. 3 seconds that felt, to Maya, like the ground opening beneath her feet. She had just done the one thing every fired employee, every deported worker, every quietly desperate person in service to the wealthy is trained never to do. She had touched the woman about to become the lady of the house, in front of guests, in front of staff, in front of cameras that catered events always seemed to have somewhere. Her career here, her paycheck, her health insurance, the small studio apartment she was barely affording on it, flashed through her mind in an instant. But underneath that fear was something else. Something that felt, for the first time in 3 years, like relief. Vanessa recovered first, and rage filled the space where fear had been. "Did you just touch me?" Her voice climbed an octave, cracking with fury and humiliation in front of the growing crowd. "Do you know who I am? Daniel." She spun toward the house, toward her fiancé standing frozen in the doorway. "Daniel, did you see that? She attacked me." Daniel walked forward slowly, his eyes moving between his fiancée and the maid he'd shared a quiet midnight conversation with 2 nights earlier, trying to piece together what he'd actually witnessed. "Vanessa," he said carefully, "I saw you raise your hand first." The words landed on the lawn like a slap of their own. Vanessa's mouth opened, closed. I wasn't going to actually. Daniel, she disrespected me in front of everyone, she refused to apologize, she touched me. "She stopped you from hitting her," Daniel said quietly. "That's what I saw." For a moment, something raw and dangerous crossed Vanessa's face, the mask slipping just slightly, just enough for a few of the closest guests to see it too. Then she composed herself, smoothing her dress, straightening her spine, turning the full weight of her fury toward Maya instead. "Fine," she said, voice suddenly cold and controlled in a way that was somehow worse than the shouting. "Fine. You want to play hero in front of my fiancé? Let's see how tough you really are." Her eyes swept over Maya with new, calculating interest. Not fear anymore, but something crueler. Curiosity mixed with contempt. "You moved like that wasn't your first time catching someone's hand. What are you, some kind of street fighter? Bar brawler? Is that the kind of trash we've had cleaning our silverware?" Maya said nothing. Her jaw tightened. "No," Vanessa continued, working herself back up now, feeding off her own momentum, off the audience that had gathered thick around the edges of the lawn, phones quietly rising into the air though no one dared record openly. "No, I have a better idea. You clearly think you're tough. You clearly think you don't have to respect the people who employ you. So let's find out. My cousin runs a fitness studio downtown, has a boxing ring, the whole thing. Why don't we settle this properly? You and me. 3 rounds. Let's see how tough the help really is when there's no vase to hide behind." A ripple of stunned laughter and disbelief moved through the crowd. Someone actually gasped. "Vanessa, you can't be serious." Daniel stepped forward, alarm flashing across his face. "Vanessa, that's insane. She works for us, you're not." "I am completely serious," Vanessa said, eyes locked on Maya now with the particular hunger of someone who has never once, in her entire life, lost. "Unless she's scared." "Are you scared?" The crowd's attention swung to Maya like a spotlight. And here, standing on a manicured lawn under an October sky, 3 years after she'd walked away from everything she used to be, Maya Bennett felt something shift inside her chest. Not anger exactly, but a long-buried certainty settling back into place, like a bone sliding into a socket it had been dislocated from for far too long. She thought about her mother, who used to sit ringside with a hand-painted sign. She thought about the belt she'd earned and the life she'd been forced to give up. She thought about 3 years of swallowing insults, 3 years of making herself invisible, 3 years of believing that surviving meant disappearing. She looked Vanessa dead in the eyes. "Okay," Maya said quietly. "Let's do it." Murmurs. Daniel's hand rose halfway like he wanted to intervene, then dropped again, stunned into stillness by the calm certainty in Maya's voice. A calm that had nothing to do with recklessness and everything to do with a confidence he'd never once seen from her before. Vanessa smiled, sharp and satisfied, already imagining the humiliation she was about to hand out in front of every important person she knew. She had absolutely no idea what she had just agreed to. Word travels fast in a house full of staff with nothing else to gossip about, and by the next morning, half of Charleston's high society seemed to know that Vanessa Cole had challenged her fiancé's maid to a boxing match at her cousin's private gym, 3 days before her own engagement gala. Daniel tried repeatedly to talk her out of it. "This is insane," he told her that night, pacing the length of his study while Vanessa sat perfectly composed on the leather sofa, filing her nails as though discussing dinner reservations. "You want to get in a ring with our housemaid 2 days before we host 500 people? What is wrong with you? What's wrong with me?" Vanessa's eyes flicked up cold. "She humiliated me on our own lawn, Daniel. In front of guests. In front of your business partners. I'm not going to just let that go. She stopped you from hitting her. She touched me." Daniel exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair, and for the first time in a long while, really looked at the woman he was about to marry. Not the polished version she performed for cameras and cocktail parties. The version underneath, the one that had just tried to force a grown woman to her knees on his family's lawn for the crime of getting in the way with a vase. "You could really hurt her," he said quietly. "Have you thought about that?" Vanessa actually laughed. A short, disbelieving sound. "Daniel. He's a maid. I did competitive fencing at Ashford. I've had a personal trainer since I was 19. I'm not worried about hurting her. I'm worried about her having the audacity to think she's my equal." Daniel didn't say anything else that night. But something in his chest had gone cold and quiet, the way it does when you finally see clearly something you'd been avoiding looking at directly. 2 nights later, the gym was arranged. Vanessa's cousin owned a small private boxing club downtown, the kind of place with exposed brick and expensive equipment that mostly got used by finance guys working out their aggression after long trading days. Vanessa had insisted on witnesses. Not a crowd exactly, but a small, curated group. Daniel, her cousin, 2 of Vanessa's closest friends, and the head housekeeper, who Vanessa specifically wanted there so word of Maya's humiliation would spread properly through the staff. Maya arrived in a plain t-shirt and borrowed gym shorts, her hair pulled back tight, her face unreadable. She said nothing as she wrapped her own hands with a kind of practiced muscle memory precision that made Daniel's stomach quietly drop. The same precision he'd have recognized instantly if he'd ever spent time around real fighters. Vanessa, meanwhile, arrived in a matching athletic set clearly purchased for the occasion, bouncing lightly on her toes, throwing a few showy jabs at the air for her friend's benefit, laughing. 3 rounds, Vanessa announced, climbing through the ropes with theatrical flair. 2 minutes each. Let's not drag this out. I have a rehearsal dinner to get to. Maya climbed into the ring without a word. The bell rang. For the first 4 seconds, Vanessa came forward fast, throwing wild, untrained punches with more confidence than technique, expecting, clearly, for this to end quickly and humiliatingly for the woman she still, even now, saw as beneath her. Maya simply wasn't there. She slipped the first punch with barely a shift of her shoulders, slipped the second, rolled under the third with a fluid economy of motion that made the small crowd around the ring go instantly, deathly silent. The kind of silence that comes from suddenly realizing you're watching something you don't understand, something far beyond what you expected. Vanessa, breathing harder now, confused and increasingly frustrated, threw a wide, desperate hook. Maya caught it on her forearm without flinching, and in the same motion, smooth, unhurried, terrifyingly controlled, she stepped inside Vanessa's guard and landed a single precise counter to the body. Not hard. Not even close to hard. A tap, really, by the standards of what Maya was actually capable of. But it was enough. Vanessa's legs buckled. She staggered back into the ropes, gasping, eyes wide with something that had nothing to do with pain and everything to do with sudden, dawning realization. The room had gone utterly silent. Even Vanessa's friends had stopped laughing. Daniel stood frozen at ringside, his mouth slightly open, watching the woman who had spent months scrubbing his floors move like she'd trained her entire life for exactly this moment. 'Cause she had. Maya stepped back, hands still raised, breathing controlled and even, watching Vanessa with an expression that held no cruelty in it. Only a quiet, settled certainty, the look of someone who had just remembered, all at once, exactly who she used to be. "You should probably sit down," Maya said quietly. And in the stunned silence of that small downtown gym, Vanessa Cole, a woman who had never once in her life been beaten at anything, finally understood far too late exactly who she'd been humiliating for the past 6 weeks. The gym stayed silent for a long moment after Maya lowered her hands. Vanessa slid down against the ropes, not because she was seriously hurt, but because her legs had genuinely stopped obeying her, the shock of the moment hitting harder than the punch itself ever had. Her cousin rushed forward, half catching her under the arms. Her 2 friends stood frozen near the ring apron, phones forgotten in their hands, staring at Maya like she'd sprouted a second head. Daniel was the first to move. He climbed through the ropes fast, kneeling beside Vanessa, checking her face, her breathing. "Are you okay? Vanessa, look at me, are you hurt?" "I'm fine," Vanessa managed, though her voice had lost every ounce of its earlier confidence. She stared up at Maya, who stood a few feet away, unwrapping her hands with the same calm precision she'd used to wrap them, and something in Vanessa's expression cracked open. Not gratitude, not yet, but the first genuine confusion of her adult life. What are you?" Maya didn't answer right away. She finished unwrapping her left hand, folded the wrap neatly, and finally looked up. "My name," she said quietly, "is Maya Bennett. 3 years ago, I was the WBFA featherweight champion. 14 wins. One of them against a woman ranked in the top 5 in the world." She paused, and for the first time since anyone in that gym had known her, something raw slipped into her voice. "I gave it up when my mother got sick. Age 4. I needed money faster than any fight purse could get me, and a promoter I trusted stole what I did have. By the time she passed, I had nothing left. No career, no savings, no name anyone would recognize anymore. I changed careers because it was the only thing I knew how to do that didn't require people to trust me with their money again. Clean houses now. I'm good at it. It's honest work." Her eyes moved to Vanessa. "It doesn't make me less than you. It never did." The silence that followed was different from the shocked silence before. Heavier, more human. Vanessa's friends exchanged glances, unsure where to look. The cousin who owned the gym had gone pale, clearly running through legal liability scenarios in his head. And Daniel was staring at Maya like he was seeing an entirely different person than the one who'd carried trays through his kitchen for 6 weeks. "You could have told someone," Daniel said quietly. "Any of it. I would have. Would you?" Maya's voice wasn't accusatory, just tired. "Mr. Cross, with respect, the moment people like me tell people like you anything about ourselves, we stop being staff and start being a story you feel sorry for. I didn't want pity. I wanted a paycheck and to be left alone to grieve in peace." She looked at Vanessa, still slumped against the ropes. "I never wanted this either. I would have gone my whole life without anyone here knowing. But your fiancé made that impossible." Vanessa flinched like she'd been struck again, harder this time, by words instead of a fist. "I didn't know," she said, and her voice cracked in a way none of her friends had ever heard before. I never asked. I never once asked you anything about your life." "No," Maya agreed simply. "You didn't." The cousin cleared his throat awkwardly, mumbling something about needing to close up the gym, and the small group began slowly to disperse. Vanessa's friends murmuring quiet, uncertain goodbyes, unable to meet anyone's eyes, clearly already imagining how fast this story would spread through their circle by morning despite everyone's assurances of discretion. Daniel walked Maya to her car afterward, the parking lot quiet under sodium streetlights, the October air sharp and cold. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all of it. The way she's treated you. The way I let it happen without saying anything sooner. I should have stepped in a long time ago." Maya paused before getting into her car, considering him for a long moment. "You're not the one who owes me an apology, Mr. Cross." "Not really." "I know," he said quietly. "But I'm still sorry." She almost smiled, almost. "Good night, Mr. Cross." She drove home to her small studio apartment that night with her hands still faintly sore. Her heart pounding with something she hadn't let herself feel in 3 years. Not triumph exactly, but the strange, unfamiliar sensation of being seen. Fully seen, for the first time since she'd buried her mother and buried herself right alongside her. She had no idea that 200 miles away, a very different kind of storm was already beginning to build, because Vanessa Cole did not handle humiliation quietly, and by morning she had already made a decision that would change everything. Vanessa didn't sleep that night. She lay awake in the guest wing of the Cross estate. She and Daniel had separate rooms until the wedding, an old-fashioned tradition her grandmother had insisted on, replaying the moment over and over in her mind. The silence of the gym. The staggering impact of a punch she barely felt land. The look on Daniel's face, kneeling beside her instead of comforting her. His eyes locked instead on the maid who just humbled her in front of everyone who mattered. By 4 in the morning, humiliation had curdled into something colder and more dangerous. A plan. She knew people. That was the one advantage she'd always had over everyone else. Not talent, not kindness, just an endless web of connections built through decades of country clubs and charity galas and her family's slowly fading name. And she intended to use every single one of them. By 9 the next morning she'd made 3 phone calls. The first was to the head of household staffing, a woman named Patricia who managed hiring for half the great houses in Charleston. "I need Maya Bennett's employment terminated today," Vanessa said crisply. "Cite whatever reason you'd like. Insubordination. I don't care." The second call was to a gossip columnist she'd cultivated a friendly relationship with over the years, the kind of relationship built on mutually beneficial leaks. "I have a story for you," Vanessa said sweetly. Disgraced boxer, working as a maid under a fake identity, attacked her employer's fiancé. "It's a good one. Front page good." The third call was the most dangerous of all, to her family's lawyer, asking quietly, carefully, what legal options existed for pressing charges against a member of staff who had physically assaulted her. By noon, the wheels were already turning. Maya received a call from Patricia informing her, with false professional sympathy, that her services were no longer required at the Cross estate, effective immediately, and that under the circumstances she should not expect a reference. By 2, the gossip column had gone up online. Sensationalized, cruel, twisting the story into something almost unrecognizable, painting Maya as a violent con artist who'd infiltrated a wealthy household under false pretenses. By 3, Maya's phone was ringing with numbers she didn't recognize, and comments were piling up beneath the article faster than she could bear to read them. She sat alone in her small apartment, the article glowing on her phone screen, and felt the ground she'd so carefully rebuilt over 3 years crumbling beneath her all over again. She thought about calling someone. There was no one left to call. Her mother was gone. The friends she'd had in the fighting world had scattered when she disappeared, assuming reasonably that she wanted to be left alone. She was, once again, entirely by herself against a machine built to crush people like her. Except this time, she didn't even have a ring to fight it in. She didn't know that across town, Daniel Cross had just read the same article, and it had ignited something in him he hadn't felt in years. real, unfiltered anger. He found Vanessa in the mansion's rose garden that evening, sipping wine among the very flowers Maya had arranged 3 days earlier, looking entirely unbothered, as though she hadn't just detonated a bomb in someone else's life. "You had her fired," Daniel said, voice low and dangerously calm. "You leaked a story to the press. You're talking to lawyers about pressing charges, Vanessa. After you're the one who challenged her to a fight. After you're the one who raised your hand first." Vanessa set her wine glass down with deliberate calm. "I'm protecting my reputation, Daniel." "Our reputation? Do you have any idea what people are saying? That I lost to household staff. That's not a story I can just let sit out there. So your solution was to destroy her life." "My solution," Vanessa said, standing now, voice sharpening, "was to remind everyone, including you, of who actually belongs in this family and who was just passing through it in an apron." The words hung in the cold evening air like something poisonous. Daniel stared at the woman he'd been planning to marry in 4 days, and for the first time, saw her with total unflinching clarity. Not the polished fiancée his family had approved of, not the woman he'd convinced himself he loved, but someone capable of genuine, calculated cruelty toward a person who had done nothing but survive. "Call off the lawyer," he said quietly. "Call the columnist. Fix this, Vanessa. Tonight." Vanessa's chin lifted, defiant even now. "Or what?" Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. He simply turned and walked back into the house, already pulling out his phone. Not to call his own lawyer, not yet, but to do something he should have done days ago. He was going to find Maya. And he was going to fix what his fiancée had broken, whatever it cost him. Maya was packing. It felt strange, folding the same t-shirts and jeans she'd unpacked in this tiny apartment 3 years earlier, when she'd arrived in Charleston with nothing but a duffel bag and a grief so heavy it had physically bent her posture for months. She'd told herself back then that starting over meant starting quiet, invisible. And for 3 years it had worked. Now the article had her old name, her real name, her fighting name, trending in local circles, twisted into something ugly and false. Comments calling her a con artist, a fraud, a violent liability. Old acquaintances from the fighting world had started reaching out too, some kind, some just curious. All of it too much, too fast, after 3 years of careful silence. She was folding her last drawer of clothes when someone knocked on her apartment door. She almost didn't answer. But something in the particular rhythm of the knock, steady, patient, not aggressive, made her open it anyway. Daniel Cross stood in the hallway, still in his work clothes, tie loosened, looking like he'd driven straight there without stopping to think twice. "Mr. Cross." Maya's voice was flat, guarded. "If you're here to collect a uniform, I already left it folded on the... I'm not here about a uniform." He exhaled hard, like he'd been holding his breath the entire drive over. "Maya, I need you to know. I had no idea she'd do any of this. The firing, the article, the lawyer. I found out an hour ago and I came straight here." Maya studied him for a long moment, arms crossed, unwilling to let hope in too quickly. Hope was expensive, and she'd already paid for it once with everything she had. "What do you want, Mr. Cross?" "I want to fix it," he said simply. "I already called the columnist. She's pulling the story down tonight, running a correction tomorrow. I called our family lawyer and told him if anyone so much as whispers the word charges, I'll be the one filing them against Vanessa for assault. And I want to offer you your job back. Better terms. Full back pay for however long this takes to resolve. But I understand completely if that's the last thing you want from this family right now." Maya didn't answer right away. She sat down slowly on the arm of her worn second-hand couch, the fight seeming to drain out of her all at once now that the immediate crisis had a name and a face standing in front of her willing to take responsibility. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "You could have stayed out of it. Let your lawyers handle it quietly. Let the story blow over. Married her anyway, moved on." Daniel was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because watching you in that ring 3 nights ago, I saw more integrity in 2 minutes than I've seen from Vanessa in the 2 years we've been together. You had every reason to hurt her badly, and you didn't. You showed restraint she's never once shown anyone in her life. That's not nothing to me." He paused. "And because I spent this whole week realizing I've been about to marry someone I don't actually recognize when she's not performing for an audience. That's not your fault. But it's not something I can unsee now." Maya absorbed that in silence, the weight of the last 3 days finally, quietly, catching up with her all at once. "I don't need saving, Mr. Cross," she said, though her voice had softened. "I've survived worse than a bad newspaper article." "I know," he said. "I'm not trying to save you. I'm trying to do the right thing, which is about 3 days too late, but I'm trying." For the first time since the humiliating ordeal began, something like a small, genuine laugh escaped her. Tired, disbelieving, but real. "You're persistent, I'll give you that. So is that a yes?" Maya looked around her small apartment, at the half-packed bag, at the phone still glowing with cruel comments she hadn't been able to stop reading, at the life she'd so carefully, quietly rebuilt and had watched threaten to collapse in the space of 48 hours. And she thought, too, about the 11 months she'd worn a championship belt and let herself believe, briefly, that she deserved good things. "I need a few days," she said finally. "But thank you for coming here. Most people wouldn't have." Daniel nodded, something easing visibly in his shoulders. "Take whatever time you need." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, whatever happens with the wedding, with Vanessa, with any of it, you were a champion long before that ring 3 nights ago, Maya. Anyone who watched what you did in there knows that." He left, and Maya sat alone in the quiet of her apartment for a long time afterward, staring at the half-packed bag, feeling something inside her chest that she hadn't dared feel in 3 long years. Something that felt cautiously like hope. The wedding was 2 days away, and the Cross estate had become a house holding its breath. Vanessa, cornered by consequences she'd never once faced in her life, tried everything to salvage the situation. She called Daniel's mother, hoping for an ally. But Eleanor Cross, a sharp, formidable woman who had built half the family's charitable foundation herself, had already heard the full story from her son and offered no comfort whatsoever. "I raised my son to marry someone with character, Vanessa," she said coldly over the phone. "Right now I'm not sure you have any." Vanessa tried the columnist directly, offering an exclusive interview to reshape the narrative, only to learn the correction had already run, quietly clarifying that Vanessa Cole had initiated the physical confrontation and that Maya Bennett, a former professional athlete working an honest job, had shown considerable restraint throughout. She tried Daniel himself, showing up at his office downtown, tearful, apologetic in the performative way she'd always been best at. "I made a mistake," she said, gripping his hands across his desk. "I panicked. I was embarrassed. I'll apologize to her. I'll do whatever it takes, Daniel, please. We've planned this wedding for a year." Daniel studied her for a long moment, and for the first time in their 2-year relationship, he let himself see, without flinching, the pattern he'd spent 2 years quietly ignoring. Every small cruelty toward waitstaff he'd excused as stress, every dismissive comment toward people beneath her he'd told himself wasn't really who she was. It had always been who she was. He'd simply chosen, for 2 years, not to look directly at it. "I need you to understand something," he said quietly, gently pulling his hands back. "This isn't really about the article, or the fight, or even about Maya specifically. It's about who you are when you think no one important is watching. And I can't marry someone I'm afraid to leave alone in a room with people who work for me. Vanessa's face crumpled, real tears this time, not performed ones. Daniel, please. The wedding's off, he said, and though his voice shook slightly, it didn't waver. I'll have the venue and vendors handled. I'm sorry, Vanessa. I really am. But I can't do this. The engagement's collapse became, within days, its own kind of local scandal, dwarfing the original article entirely, dominating every conversation in Charleston's social circles for weeks. Vanessa's family, already stretched thin, absorbed both the financial and social cost of the cancelled 500-guest gala, and Vanessa herself disappeared from the city's social scene entirely for months afterward, humbled in a way money alone had never managed to humble her. Maya heard about the cancelled wedding the way she heard most things now, quietly, secondhand, through the same house staff grapevine that had once spread cruel gossip about her. She felt no triumph in it. Just a strange, settled kind of peace, the sense of a scale finally balancing itself after being tipped too far for too long. A week later, she returned to the Cross estate, not as staff this time, but at Daniel's personal invitation, to discuss something he'd been thinking about since the night in that downtown gym. I want to fund something, he told her, sitting across from her in the same study where he'd once fought with Vanessa about calling off the whole disastrous confrontation. A gym. A real one. Training space, scholarships, especially for young women who can't afford proper coaching. I want your name on it if you'll let me, and I want you running the program if you'd ever want to. Maya sat in stunned silence for a long moment, turning the offer over in her mind, thinking of every young girl growing up now the way she once had. Talented, hungry, one financial disaster away from losing everything she'd built. Why me? She finally asked. You barely know me. I know enough, Daniel said simply. I know you had every reason in the world to become someone bitter and hard after everything you went through. And instead you became someone who showed restraint when you had every right not to. That's rare, Maya. I don't want to waste it. For the first time in 3 long years, Maya Bennett, champion, caretaker, survivor, quiet woman who'd once believed disappearing was the only way to stay safe, allowed herself to imagine a future bigger than survival. Okay, she said softly, and for the first time in a very long while, she meant it completely. Let's build something. The gym opened 4 months later, on a bright Saturday morning in early spring, in a converted warehouse space not far from where Maya had grown up. She'd named it simply, the Bennett Foundation for Women's Boxing. No marble floors, no crystal vases, no room she wasn't allowed to sit down in. Just heavy bags, worn mats, and sunlight pouring through big industrial windows onto a floor full of young women learning, for the first time in their lives, that their bodies could be powerful instead of just observed. Maya stood at the front of the room that first morning, watching a class of 12 girls, ages ranging from 14 to 22, most of them there on full scholarships funded quietly, without fanfare, by Daniel Cross's foundation. She recognized pieces of herself in every one of them. The girl in the back row who flinched every time someone raised their voice too loud. The girl near the front who fought like she had something to prove to a father who'd never once shown up to watch. She'd learned, over the past 4 months of building this place from nothing, that healing rarely happens the way you expect it to. It doesn't happen all at once, in one dramatic confrontation on a manicured lawn or in one triumphant moment in a boxing ring. It happens slowly, in the accumulation of small choices, showing up every morning to teach a jab-cross combination to a scared 14-year-old, learning to say her own name out loud again without flinching, letting herself believe, gradually, that she deserved a life bigger than the small, careful one she'd built to survive. Vanessa Cole, meanwhile, had all but disappeared from Charleston's social landscape. Word trickled back occasionally, that she'd moved to Atlanta to stay with distant relatives, that she'd taken a quiet corporate job far removed from the galas and country clubs that had once defined her entire identity, that whatever wealth and status she'd been chasing through marriage had slipped permanently out of reach the moment her own cruelty had finally been witnessed by the one person whose opinion could have saved her. Nobody Maya knew had heard from her directly, and Maya, for her part, found she genuinely didn't wish the woman harm. She wished her, quietly, the same thing she wished herself: the chance to actually see other people clearly someday, instead of only seeing what she could use them for. Daniel visited the gym often in those early months. Not as a donor checking on his investment, but the way a person visits a place that's slowly become important to them. He'd sit quietly near the back during classes, sometimes helping wrap hands for beginners who didn't know how yet, sometimes just watching Maya move through a room full of young fighters with a confidence and warmth that had nothing left in it of the quiet, invisible woman who'd once folded his towels with perfectly sharp corners. "You're different here," he told her one evening, after the last class had cleared out and they were alone in the gym, the industrial windows glowing orange with sunset light. "Than you were at the house, I mean." "I am different here," Maya said simply, wrapping a stray piece of tape around a spool. "At the house I was surviving. Here I'm actually living." Daniel nodded slowly, understanding settling into his face. "I'm glad," he said. "You deserve that. You deserved it a long time before any of this happened." Maya looked at him for a long moment. This man who'd walked into a kitchen at midnight because something in a tired maid's posture had bothered him, who'd stood in a downtown boxing gym and seen restraint where his fiancée had wanted to see weakness, who'd chosen, in the end, to burn down a wedding rather than stay silent about who someone really was underneath the performance. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for seeing me before you had any real reason to." "I think," Daniel said softly, "you were always fairly hard to miss once someone actually bothered to look." Outside, the Charleston evening settled gold and quiet over the gym, over the young women filing out with their gym bags and their futures slightly wider than they'd been that morning, over a city that had, in its own slow and imperfect way, watched a quiet woman remember exactly who she was. A year later, Maya Bennett stood in the same ring where it had all started. The small downtown gym, quiet now, empty except for the two of them, exactly 1 year to the day since a challenge on a manicured lawn had changed the entire shape of her life. She hadn't planned to come back here. But Daniel had asked her to meet him, cryptic about why, and something in his voice on the phone had made her curious enough to say yes. He was waiting for her at the edge of the ring when she arrived, hands in his pockets, a small, nervous energy about him that she'd never quite seen before. Not the composed businessman who'd once talked a lawyer out of pressing charges, not the calm ally who'd sat quietly through months of scholarship applications and gym renovations. Something younger, more uncertain. "You wanted to see me?" Maya asked, climbing through the ropes, the familiar canvas beneath her feet feeling different now. Not like a battlefield, but almost like a place of celebration. "I wanted to say thank you," Daniel said. "Properly. Not just for what happened here a year ago. For everything after. The gym's changed 43 girls' lives this year. 43, Maya. Because you decided not to disappear when someone tried to make you feel small." Maya felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. "You built that just as much as I did." "I wrote checks," Daniel said quietly. "You built it. There's a difference." He paused, and something shifted in his posture. The nervous energy she'd noticed finally settling into something more deliberate. "I've thought a lot this past year about what actually matters. About the kind of person I want in my life, in my corner. The way you were in that ring. Steady, honest, unwilling to back down from what's right even when it costs you everything." He took a breath. "I'm not asking for anything today. I just wanted you to know that this year, working alongside you, watching you build something real out of something that could have destroyed you, it's meant more to me than almost anything in my life. And whatever this is between us, I'd like to see where it goes. Whenever you're ready. No pressure. No timeline. Maya stood quietly in the center of the ring, the same place where a year ago she'd remembered, all at once, exactly who she used to be. She thought about her mother, about the belt she'd once worn, about 3 years of making herself as small and invisible as possible just to survive a world that had taught her that visibility was dangerous. She thought about 43 young women learning this year alone, that they didn't have to disappear either. I'd like that, she said softly. I think I'd like that a lot. Daniel smiled. A real one, unguarded, the kind she'd only seen a handful of times in the year she'd known him. Yeah, Maya said, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, the word came without any fear attached to it at all. If there's one thing this story teaches us, it's this. The world will often try to measure your worth by what you're wearing, what you're carrying, or what job title sits beside your name. But dignity was never something anyone else has the right to take from you. And sometimes the quietest person in the room is carrying more strength, more history, and more grace than anyone around them could possibly imagine. Never mistake someone's silence for weakness. And never underestimate what a person can survive and still choose kindness on the other side of it. If this story moved you even a little today, please hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel keep telling stories like Maya's. If you're new here, consider subscribing because we've got so many more emotional, unforgettable stories coming your way. And if you know someone who needs to hear today that they're stronger than they feel right now, send this one to them. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.